You're watching Sherlock Mysteries, where every story hides a deep secret and an unexpected twist that will keep you on edge. If you love suspense and thrilling tales, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Welcome to Midnight Creed. Let's start the story.
Hercule Poirot was drawn to Dorsetshire by a strange invitation, and he found himself in an even stranger family. The note had arrived neatly folded in an envelope of thick ivory paper with a family symbol that Poirot did not recognize, a silver lion rampart over a fractured crown. A tiny message was written beneath the exquisite calligraphy. Monsieur Poirot, your caution and insight are necessary in a sensitive family situation. There has been no crime yet. However, I am concerned that one is on its way. Please contact Lady Imogen Willoughby at Ashcroft Hall. Poirot raised an eyebrow before carefully folding the note back into its envelope and tapping it twice with his forefinger. There is no crime yet. Such a statement was appealing to the small grey cells. In addition, he was between cases and found the English countryside pleasant in late spring. A potential crime, cloaked in nobility and mystery, was just what he needed to enhance his intellect. When he got out of the hired automobile in front of Ashcroft Hall, the clouds overhead had begun to collect like chatter, heavy and waiting. The estate was the type Poirot had come to associate with a dying class, large but frayed, ivy-strangled and proud of its demise. The windows of the manor glared at him with aristocratic disdain. The butler, a skinny guy named Treadwell with a raspy voice and cheekbones sharp enough to chop bread, escorted him through a large foyer surrounded by ancestral portraits. Poirot was led into the drawing room, where Lady Imogen awaited him. She rose as he walked in, a tall woman in her early 60s, with the angular grace of an oil painting. Her ash-grey hair was swept back in a once fashionable style, and her pale hands were decorated with rings that she did not bother with. Her poise was unwavering. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a low, clipped tone, "thanks for coming. I hope the journey wasn't too unpleasant." "On the contrary," Poirot responded, bowing slightly. "The countryside is incredibly, how do you say, cleaning for the spirit. But I suspect, madam, that your letter indicates that my soul will not remain so serene for long." Lady Imogen gave a ghostly smile. "Indeed, I am not offering you serenity, but a problem." She beckoned for a seat. "Before we begin, do you know much of my family, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot sat neatly in the chair, his hat resting on his legs. "Only that the Willoughbys are of old English stock, and that Ashcroft Hall has belonged to your family for many generations." "Centuries," she amended with a hint of pride. "But I'm afraid the lines of blood do not carry with them guarantees of character." She walked to the sideboard, poured herself a small glass of sherry, and returned her attention to him. "My husband, Colonel Desmond Willoughby, died 3 years ago. Since then, I've stayed at Ashcroft with my children, or more specifically, my child and his entourage. Your son?" "Yes, Julian. He emerged from the war a different man, not in the way you might expect. No visible wounds and no nightmares. But something within him stiffened. He married quickly to a girl from Sussex named Cassandra, and with her came her younger brother Felix, who seems to have taken up permanent residence here." Her lip twisted slightly. "And this entourage," Poirot asked gently, "has become a problem?" "It has transformed the house into a theatre of suspense. Cassandra plays the elegant mistress of the house, but she is as fragile as crystal. Felix, meanwhile, considers himself a poet-philosopher, wandering around with arrogant charm and unfinished verses. Then there's Clara, my niece, my late sister's daughter. She has lived with me since she was a child, bright, kind, and increasingly unhappy." Poirot offered a slight nod. "And you sense that something is amiss?" "Not just sense it. Last week there was a disagreement, one of many, but this one ended in a disastrous crash. One of the family heirlooms, my grandmother's Venetian mirror, was shattered in the East Wing hallway. No one has claimed responsibility, and yet I suspect it was no accident. That mirror, like many other things in this house, meant more than it appeared." Poirot clenched his fingers. "You think it was symbolic, madame?" "I think it was a warning." She stepped to a little cabinet and brought out a folded piece of parchment. "The next morning, I found this under my bedroom door," Poirot took the note and carefully opened it. The handwriting was rough and almost infantile. Everything breaks eventually, even legacies. He looked up. "And you fear this is only the beginning?" Lady Imogen nodded. "There's resentment here, Monsieur Poirot, hidden but sharp. Someone is resentful of this house's weight, history, and entitlements, and I fear someone is planning to end everything, perhaps through me." Poirot rose, smoothing his lapel. "Then let us deny them the satisfaction. I will remain, Lady Imogen, and I will observe." She appeared to exhale for the first time. "Thank you. Tell me," she said, "are all the members of the household currently in residence?" She turned to face the window. "Yes, Cassandra, Felix, Julian, and Clara are all present. In addition to our housekeeper, Mrs. Bletchley, and Treadwell, of course." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then, madame, it is time to introduce myself to them." Outside, as if on cue, the first clap of thunder echoed across the Dorset hills. The next morning dawned pale and gloomy, with a dense mist clinging to the ground like an unspoken secret. Poirot, ever a creature of ritual, ate breakfast alone in the morning room. Toast, a soft-boiled egg, and 2 cups of strong black coffee, all perfectly ordered to his liking. The silence at Ashcroft Hall was not peaceful. It hummed with restraint, like a violin string pulled taut but not yet played. Treadwell emerged at exactly 9:30, silent as a phantom, to notify Poirot that the family had gathered in the drawing-room at Lady Imogen's request. Poirot, wiping the last crumb from his fingers, nodded once before following. The drawing-room was not a warm place. It exhibited the hallmarks of old money and old pride, walnut paneling, a massive frigid stone fireplace, and furniture so stiff it appeared to be designed for exhibition rather than comfort. As Poirot approached, all heads turned with varied degrees of interest and anxiety. Lady Imogen stood by the hearth with her spine as straight as the andirons behind her. Clara stood beside her, tall and soft-featured, her auburn hair done up in a rushed chignon. She flashed Poirot a short smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Julian Willoughby sat with his legs crossed and his fingers templed, a 35-year-old, with a hawkish profile and an evident military immobility. He wore a tidy blue suit with no flair, and while his attitude was polite, there was a hint of impatience in his stance, as if every talk were a prelude to something more significant. Cassandra, sitting on the settee, exuded the grace of a woman, aware of her own looks. She wore a tight olive dress with a moth-shaped brooch. Her grin was rehearsed and her eyes were alert. Her brother, Felix, sat at her feet, a lean man in his 20s with a lock of hair constantly falling into his eyes and the languid demeanor of someone who thought effort was vulgar. A cigarette danced between his fingers, despite the early. Our Lady Imogen gestured at Poirot. "May I introduce Monsieur Hercule Poirot, whom I mentioned yesterday? He came here at my invitation." "Ah, the famous detective," Felix remarked, smirking. "Should we be alarmed? Has a body been found in the shrubbery?" Poirot tilted his head slightly. "I am merely a visitor, monsieur, not yet a bloodhound. Though I find the shrubbery on English estates to be extremely revealing." Julian's voice broke in. "Mother, I must ask, what exactly have you told him?" "Only that I suspect something is brewing beneath this roof," Lady Imogen answered calmly, "and that I have reason to believe it may not end well." Cassandra's smile twitched. "Seriously, Imogen, this is starting to sound like a sensation novel." "No," Clara replied slowly. "It sounds like the truth." Everyone turned their heads to look at her. She looked down, embarrassed, and folded her hands tightly into her lap. Poirot watched with keen interest. Julian rose. "If you have any specific concerns, Poirot, I hope you will bring them to me personally. I handle the estate now, and I will not subject my family to undue scrutiny." "But, monsieur," observed Poirot calmly, "the scrutiny is not mine. It already exists, no? The message left beneath Lady Imogen's door, the smashed mirror, the tensions that pulse so loudly through this chamber, these are not anything I produced. I am only the observer. That note could have been anyone," Felix explained. "A melodramatic servant, perhaps. We've had a few come and depart during the last year." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "And the mirror." Silence. Then Cassandra spoke, her tone pleasant. "An accident, undoubtedly. That hallway is particularly susceptible to drafts. Doors bang, stuff fall. Poirot looked at Clara, who had become absolutely still. He took a step forward. Then allow me a courtesy. I'd like to chat briefly with every one of you, if you'd be so kind. Not an interrogation, but more a chat. Julian's jaw clenched. Is that really necessary? Lady Imogen responded. Yes, before Poirot could respond. It is. The family left one by one. Cassandra went first, providing a muttered excuse about a hair appointment in the village. Felix followed quickly after, pausing only to toss ash into a neighboring potted plant. Julian stayed, seemingly reluctant, but eventually left with a murmured word for Treadwell. Only Clara remained with her hands clasped. Poirot approached her carefully. Mademoiselle, would you permit me the first conversation with you? She nodded, barely above a murmur. Of course. They went to the conservatory, a huge glass space decorated with orchids and sun-bleached rugs. The air had a subtle smell of moist stone and citrus polish. Poirot waited till everyone was seated before speaking. You are unhappy here, mademoiselle. She seemed astonished. Why do you say that? The eyes betray, and unhappiness is more difficult to conceal in someone who is inexperienced with lying. Clara offered a feeble smile. I suppose I've never been good at hiding how I feel. Poirot leaned forwards. Maybe you might help me comprehend. What has disturbed the peace in this household? She paused. Things have altered since the Colonel's death. Julian seized charge. Of everything. Finances, choices, and the workforce. Cassandra supports him, but he's become rigid, controlling. Even cruel. To you? To each of us. But especially for his mother. He has expressed interest in selling Ashcroft several times. He claims the estate is a relic. Cassandra would want a location in London. Felix is merely along for the journey. Poirot furrowed his brow. And you, mademoiselle? Why do you stay? She looked away. Because this was once a home. Because Lady Imogen is the only family who has ever treated me kindly. I cannot leave her here to be eaten alive. Poirot scrutinized her face. And the mirror? Clara's jaws tightened. I didn't break it, if that's what you're asking. No, mademoiselle. I'm asking if you know who did. There was a prolonged hush. Then slowly she said, No, but I overheard noises, late at night. Cassandra and Julian raised their voices. I could not make out the words, but I heard the glass smash. And someone is swearing. Poirot nodded slowly. And the note? Another pause. I spotted Felix in the west hallway that morning. He seems shaken, but when I asked, he simply made a joke. He always does that when he is scared. Poirot smiled, weakly. Merci, mademoiselle, that's all for now. As Clara rose and departed, Poirot stayed sitting, listening to the distant chime of the hall clock striking 10. Outside, the mist was lifting, and Ashcroft's thick hedges appeared like maize. There was something here, not simply hatred, but something deeper, grudges buried under the surface like bones beneath the earth. The family played at civility, but soon Poirot saw the fractures, and when he rose to begin the next interview, he wondered not if there would be a crime, but when it would occur. Poirot didn't waste time. After Clara left, he returned briefly to the morning room, where Treadwell remained quietly with his hands folded behind his back. The butler possessed that unique English quality of appearing ever present but never intrusive, a walking ghost of formality. Treadwell, Poirot said lightly, might I impose on you to request Mr. Felix join me here for a short conversation? Of course, sir, came the gravelly response. He's likely at the library, sir. Should I fetch him now? If you would be so kind. Treadwell left with a slow nod. Poirot approached the window. The mist outside was dissipating in places, but the garden beyond remained covered, its hedges standing as solemn sentinels in mourning. Something about the estate stirred a gentle melancholy, an old house watching itself fade. Poirot frequently discovered that environments reflected their occupants. A few minutes later the door opened, and Felix floated in, leisurely, trailing the hazy aroma of bergamot and smoke. He slumped into a nearby recliner with the elegance of a man who had never worked a day in his life. Treadwell said you wanted to interrogate me, he said with a lazy grin. Should I brace myself? Poirot smiled. Only if you're easily bruised, monsieur. I am not a cop. I am only a visitor looking for the truth. Terribly French of you, Felix said, plucking invisible lint from his lapel. Well then, truth away. Poirot folded his hands. Explain, Monsieur Felix, your affiliation with the Willoughbys. It is related exclusively through your sister, correct? Correct. Cassandra married Julian shortly after the war. I was 20 at the time, fresh out of nothing in particular. Cass invited me to Ashcroft for the summer, and I've never left. Indeed. And nobody objected? Oh, they did, Felix answered, amused. Julian muttered. Imogen glared, but Cassandra insisted. She claimed I brought life into the house. And now? Now, Felix remarked, his eyes narrowing slightly. I believe they would pay generously to have me leave the premises, Julian especially. We don't quite agree on things of aspiration. Poirot tilted his head. And your ambition, monsieur? Not to inherit Ashcroft, if that's what you're wondering. Felix smirked. I prefer my freedom. Besides, the estate is a crumbling relic. Julian sees it as well. The only difference is that he intends to profit off the remains. I at least let it go peacefully. Poirot looked at him for a time. And what of Lady Imogen? Felix's expression flickered. Not mockery this time, but something gentler. She has always been polite to me. Distant, but decent. I believe she tolerates me for Cassandra's sake. Or maybe I remind her of someone. Ghosts are always present in older families, and... Clara? Felix let out a cloud of smoke from the cigarette he had made somewhere along the road. Clara is too good for this place. For all of us, truly, but she is stuck. Like ivy on a crumbling wall, she can't detach without tearing herself apart. You care for her? I think everyone does, in their own way, Felix answered gently. She's untouched. That makes people protective or jealous. Poirot paused, then leaned forward slightly. The mirror, monsieur. You know which one I'm referring to. Felix looked up sharply and chuckled without humor. The mirror again. You aren't letting that go. It was not an accident, I think. No, I dare say it wasn't, Felix answered, his voice becoming flat. But I didn't break it, if that's your next question. Poirot said nothing. Felix drummed his fingers on the chair's arm. That night I noticed Julian standing in front of it. Just standing, not moving. As if he was looking. Into or through it. Then I heard the crash and went away. Make of that what you will. Did you speak to him? No, Julian does not speak. He delivers opinions, orders, and verdicts. And the note left for Lady Imogen. Felix's eyes hardened. I didn't write. Silently, but you saw it. I did. Poirot waited. Felix sighed. I noticed her reading it the next morning. She wasn't aware I was there. She appeared frightened. I didn't believe anything could scare her. Poirot tilted his head. Thank you, monsieur. You've been more open than I expected. Felix stood, brushing phantom dust off his trousers. Don't take that for honesty, Monsieur Poirot. We all have secrets. Even you, I suppose. Poirot smiled weakly. Ah, but mine, monsieur, are perfectly arranged and utterly harmless. After Felix had left, Poirot wrote a quick note in the small pocketbook he kept inside his jacket. The fissures were starting to show. Already inconsistencies arose. Timing, temperament, tension. This was no ordinary family squabble. There was motive in the air, unspoken and half-formed, but motive nonetheless. By lunchtime he had spoken with Cassandra. The discussion had been smooth, shallow, and well-controlled. She denied hearing anything on the night of the mirror's destruction, exhibited slight anxiety about the message, and assured Poirot that the family's internal conflicts were just growing pains. The only time he showed interest was when he asked about Clara. She's terribly sensitive, Cassandra explained, fixing the emerald clasp on her wrist. She takes things to heart. A simple argument turns into a tragedy. I really worry about her. Poirot made no comment but set the tone. Not protectiveness, but ownership. At 1 o'clock, Treadwell reappeared to inform Poirot that Julian was ready to see him. The meeting took place in the study, a macho area decorated with dark wood, mounted swords and literature arranged for display rather than enjoyment. Julian stood by the window, arms folded and posture tight. Poirot arrived without saying and waited. Julian turned after a moment. "I assume you've spoken to everyone by now," he joked. "I have made introductions, yes." Julian moved to the desk. "Let me be clear, Poirot. I consented to your visit because my mother insisted. However, I do not believe in superstitions, whispers, or contrived drama. If anything needs to be done, I will do it." "With all due respect, monsieur," Poirot remarked softly, "you have been attempting to manage it for 3 years, and yet here we are." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting this family is in danger. I suggest that the threat does not lie outside these walls." Julian said nothing. Poirot drew a breath. "The mirror, monsieur. What was it that made you stare at it that night?" Julian's expression revealed nothing. "I don't know what you're talking about. Felix saw you." Julian's voice became chilly. "Felix knows what suits him. He has been a leech on this family since he first arrived. If anyone were to issue anonymous threats, it would be him. And yet he stays. Because Cassandra insists on playing the devoted sister, and because Mother refuses to make decisions." Poirot tilted his head. "And the estate? You want to sell?" "I do. Ashcroft is a sinking ship. The land is prohibitively expensive to maintain. The title no longer means anything. I'd prefer it be reborn than rot in its own nobility." Poirot considered it. "And your mother? She clings to ghosts. And dragging Clara with her. Would you say you resent that?" Julian's jaws constricted. "I would say I've grown tired of waiting." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, monsieur." The study door clicked closed behind him. Outside, the sun had broken through the haze. Poirot stepped onto the gravel path just beyond the terrace, feeling the heat on his face. Lady Imogen came from the hedges, walking slowly with her cane and... "Distant eyes, do you see it now?" she inquired without turning. Poirot joined her. "I see it starting to take shape. The mirror wasn't about the glass, it was a message, and someone, madam, is communicating in symbols." She paused near a rosebush and caressed one of its wilting blossoms. "I told you," she said calmly. "A storm is coming." Poirot nodded. "Let us hope we are not already too late." Later that afternoon, Poirot found himself sat once again in the morning chamber, this time with a small porcelain cup of Darjeeling between his fingers and the remains of a thin lemon biscuit on the saucer beside him. The sun's warmth now flowed through the tall windows, throwing long streaks of gold across the stone floor. But inside Ashcroft Hall, the mood had not brightened with the weather. If anything, it curdled. The interviews had established a foundation, not of facts, but of cracks. Each member of the household wore a mask, but none was able to conceal the strain beneath. Cassandra's poise was fragile, Felix's wit was veiled scorn, and Julian's discipline teetered on the verge of restrained rage. Only Clara and Lady Imogen had demonstrated something resembling honesty, and both, Poirot observed, shared the same type of silence, the silence of survival. He sipped his drink gently and let himself a few moments of silence. It wasn't a murder yet, but it was approaching, one in spirit. The threat had taken on life, prowling the corridors and tightening its grip. A quiet knock on the door stopped his thoughts. "Enter," Poirot said, put down his cup. Treadwell stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I have a delivery for Lady Imogen, sir, but she has asked that you open it." Poirot raised a brow. "Indeed? And what kind of delivery is it?" Treadwell stood aside, and a maid walked in, holding a rectangular bundle wrapped in brown paper and knotted with thread. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a slender book, but it had an odd weight to it, and the maid held it with her arms straight, as if she was afraid to touch it. Poirot nodded for it to be placed on the table, before dismissing them both with a nod. Once alone, he leaned over the package. There was no postage stamp or return address, just Lady Imogen's name, scrawled in block letters with what appeared to be a charcoal pencil. The penmanship was solid, but not polished. He gently untied. The string peeled back the paper and revealed a wooden box. The surface was unmarked and polished to a dull sheen. Poirot opened it. Inside there was only one item, An ancient and elegant silver hairbrush with lovely filigree along the handles. It was clearly a family heirloom, but it was completely broken down the middle. The bristles had been pulled from one side, revealing twisted metal beneath. A shredded sheet of linen was wrapped around the handle, with a tiny discoloration on the edge. A faint floral scent, something vintage, like dried lavender, remained. Poirot's gaze hardened. A folded note was found beneath the brush. He retrieved it. The past will be erased one at a time. She will not be the only one who loses her legacy. There were no signatures. He carefully closed the box and stood, making his way to Lady Imogen's sitting room. She sat at the window, a tapestry frame in front of her, but she was not sewing. She looked up as he walked in and beckoned for him to seat. "It's begun, hasn't it?" she replied gently. Poirot placed the package on the table between them. "Tell me, madame, this brush, it belonged to someone close?" She did not open the box. She did not need to. "That was my mother's. She handed it to me on the day I came of age. I stored it in the dressing room. Only the family would know where it was." Poirot nodded. "So the message is deliberate. This is not a work by an outsider. The symbolism, breaking an heirloom, destroying something personal, is intimate, designed to make you uncomfortable. Lady..." Imogen exhaled slowly. "This is a warning. The mirror. Now this. They want me to feel hunted. Then the question becomes, why? I have told you because I stand in the way." Poirot tapped the lid of the box carefully. "Can I keep this for a short time? I'd like to look at it more closely." "Of course," she said softly as he rose to leave. "He's becoming impatient, you know." Poirot turned. "Julian?" She did not confirm it. She did not need to. Poirot returned to his guest room and scrutinized the brush once more in better light. He noticed the fracture line, clean and deliberate. This was not an accident. The linen strip could be from a handkerchief or an old clothing. There were no initials, but the fabric was of excellent quality. The stain is too faint to be blood. It's most likely lipstick or rouge. Odd. Everything about the object was chosen to convey meaning. This was not a hastily made threat. It was a composition. The next morning came an unusual development. Poirot had just finished dressing when a loud voice rang out from the main hallway. Felix, angry for once. "I told you to knock, Treadwell." Poirot stepped out of the corridor just in time to see Felix marching down the stairs, half-dressed and fuming. "Something is missing," he exclaimed to no one in particular. "My writing case, it's gone. And a full sheaf of drafts." Julian emerged from the breakfast room and adjusted his cufflinks. "What nonsense is this?" "I'm telling you that someone entered my room. Last night or this morning. I don't care which. My notes, my letters, they're missing." Julian rolled his eyes. Perhaps they left out of boredom. Cassandra appeared next, already immaculate. "Felix, must you create a scene over your scribbles?" But Poirot stepped between them. "Monsieur Felix, this case, it contained only writings?" "Yes, mostly poems, fragments, and some letters." "Letters of a personal nature." Felix paused. "Some were addressed to Clara." Julian's head turned. "Clara?" Felix raised a hand. "Not like that. Reflections. Things I'd never given her." "Poirot's?" Mine sparked. "Do you suspect someone in the house?" "Who else? We have no visitors. The servants would not care." "That leaves family." Clara appeared on the upper landing, just as Poirot was about to speak. Her expression was pallid and inscrutable. Felix paused when he saw her. "I'm sorry," he replied swiftly. "I didn't mean to involve you." She nodded once and turned away. Poirot observed how her hand grabbed the banister. Something in her universe had changed. Later that day, Poirot requested a meeting with Mrs. Bletchley, the housekeeper, a tall, reedy woman with greying hair tied in a strict knot. She viewed him with the jaded distrust that is common among long-serving employees. "I wonder, madame," he inquired gently, "if you have noticed anything unusual among the servants, whispers, absences, or discomfort." She paused. "They chat, of course, that is their nature. But lately, there's tension. Not just within the family," Poirot nodded. "And have any of the maids left recently?" "One. Nora is a parlour maid." left unexpectedly 2 weeks ago. No explanation. Did she serve a particular member of the family? It's mostly Cassandra, sometimes Clara. Poirot furrowed his brow. And was anything left behind? Mrs. Bletchley paused. She left her uniform and a scarf. I still keep it in the linen room. Should like to see it. She retrieved it quickly. An ivory silk scarf, silky and delicately fragrant. Poirot brought it to the light. A ripped corner. A thread is missing. And, yes, a thin, matching stain. Rouge. The same as the linen that was wrapped around the brush, so the warning did not come from outside. However, it is possible that it was borrowed. By late afternoon, Poirot was standing alone in the hallway outside the east wing. He looked at the empty space where the mirror had once hung. The plaster around it has been crudely fixed. No replacements had been made. Behind him, the mansion creaked softly, like if breathing. He put a finger to his lips thoughtfully. Someone was meticulously and artistically arranging the fragments. An heirloom, the note, the missing letters. All of the hints were intended to shake Poirot's belief in the people of Ashcroft Hall, rather than to misdirect him. He turned back to the stairs, his footfall quiet on the thick carpet. The past was being dismantled, and someone, calmly and silently, was preparing for the final act. That dusk, a deep quiet crept over Ashcroft Hall. Dinner was a quiet affair. The family gathered out of habit rather than desire, each person preoccupied with thoughts that they did not share. Poirot sat to Lady Imogen's right, observing the conversation across the table. Julian, as always, ate with military precision and rarely looked up. Cassandra played the pleasant hostess with mechanical charm, refilling glasses, offering rolls, but never truly engaged. Felix drank more than he said. Clara sat quietly, barely touching her food, and appeared to retreat deeper into herself with each course. Poirot spoke little. He did not need to. The air was dense with withheld items. When Treadwell finished clearing the dishes and coffee was brought in the drawing room, Poirot quietly rose and turned to Lady Imogen. "If you would allow me, madam, I believe the time has come to gather. Everyone for a short conversation." She gave him a piercing look and a small nod. "Now?" "Yes, if it pleases you. I believe it could avert an unpleasant misstep." Her expression tightened. She understood. A few minutes later, they were all back in the drawing room, the fire freshly lit, the air scented with ancient wood smoke and stress. The room had gotten colder, but no one mentioned it. Poirot stood in front of the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. "I thank you all for your patience," he said gently. "What I have to say is not an accusation, but a caution. You are each aware, I assume, that recent events, the damaged mirror, the anonymous letters, the stolen personal items, are part of a premeditated pattern. A gradual, subtle erosion of trust." Felix, lounging in his regular spot, snorted sardonically. Cassandra sat stiffly, lips squeezed together in a single line. Julian stared at Poirot without blinking. Only Clara's countenance changed. She looked up, briefly hopeful. Poirot proceeded. "It is my belief that these incidents are not random nor the product of external mischief. They are supposed to elicit a reaction, to direct suspicion inward." Cassandra spoke calmly and sharply. "And do you have a theory as to who's playing puppeteer, monsieur?" Poirot lifted his hand. "I do not accuse, not yet. But I encourage each of you to evaluate who stands to benefit from Lady Imogen's anxiety, who benefits from temporarily upsetting this home, so that decisions can be made quickly." Julian shifted. "If you're suggesting that this is about the estate, I suggest only that when trust crumbles, decisions are made that may later be regretted." Lady Imogen interposed, her voice low but clear. "I am considering altering my will." Everyone looked at her. Poirot closed his eyes for a time. "I have not done it yet," she explained, "but I intend to." Julian's voice was like a razor. "Mother—" "No," she replied, cutting him off. "Let's not pretend. This house is mine, and so is the authority to determine its future. And I will not be cornered into silence by anonymous threats or broken relics." Poirot stepped back, allowing the tension to build. Felix mumbled something into his drink. Clara. cast a glance at Cassandra before returning her attention to the fire. After a pause, Poirot added softly, "Allow me to make an observation. Every one of you feels watched, and this is no accident. The person responsible for these tragedies aims to separate this family, to isolate Lady Imogen. It is working." Cassandra stood. "I won't stay to be lectured like a schoolgirl." "No," Poirot replied, "but you will listen, for your own sake. Because if this continues, I assure you that someone will be hurt." Cassandra stared at him for a moment before leaving the room without saying anything else. Felix gave a shrug and remarked, "Well, this was charming." Julian stayed a moment longer. He stared at his mother and then at Poirot but said nothing. Then he turned to leave. Only Clara remained, with her teacup quivering slightly on her lap. Poirot sat near her. "Mademoiselle, you are afraid." She nodded. "Once. I am not going to ask you to identify the individual you suspect. Not yet. But you know something more, something that you are concerned may cause harm." Clara bit her lips. "It's only a feeling, a wrongness. Every time I enter the East Wing now, I feel like I'm interfering with someone else's plan." Poirot tilted his head. "The East Wing, the place of the mirror, yes?" She nodded again. "Then perhaps," he replied softly, "we must return there." He left her after a few words of comfort and silently returned to the East Wing. The hall was faintly lighted, with only one sconce burning near where the mirror had hung. The mended wall was crude and hurriedly done. Poirot strolled the length of the corridor slowly and attentively. At the far end, a little door remained open. He hadn't noticed it previously. It was half hidden behind a faded tapestry, possibly an old servant's passage. He pressed gently. The hinges creaked. Inside was a tiny stairway that led upward. The air smelt like dust and old secrets. Poirot ascended. At the top he discovered a short corridor that led behind the family bedrooms. It was underused and shrouded in shadows, yet its dust revealed recent tracks. Light, careful footfall. They led to a little wooden door which was slightly ajar. Inside he discovered a disused chamber, possibly previously a nursery or dressing room. A single chair faced a narrow window. There was a satchel on the chair. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside are papers including poetry and letters. Felix is missing his writing case. However, it wasn't only his penmanship. There were others, trembling lines and angular notations, notes on the margins. Sentences were rewritten. Underneath it all, Clara held a single sheet. He had not read it yet. He replaced everything, closed the satchel and stood perfectly motionless. The lightest sounds came from the corridor behind him. A floorboard creaks. Poirot turned but saw nothing. He left the room just as he had found it, quietly closing the door behind him. As he descended, he noticed the silence of the tunnel and the stillness of the home. Someone had been watching from the shadows. Back in his chamber, Poirot sat by the fireplace, immersed in meditation. The parts were arranged in a pattern, a concealed passageway, a stolen satchel, Clara's handwriting combined with Felix's, someone exploiting another person's voice to arouse suspicion, but not for drama, but for the conclusion. The question was not who felt hurt. The difficulty was who was disciplined enough to wound exactly. The answer wasn't yet certain. However, the game was no longer symbolic. It was beginning to become real. The following morning dawned with an uncanny silence. Even the birds appeared reluctant to sing. A creeping fog had come in overnight, obscuring the garden's borders and coating the window panes in dew. Ashcroft Hall felt like it was wrapped in cotton, muted, silent, and expectant. Poirot got up earlier than usual, dressed meticulously, and left his room with quiet determination. The discomfort from the previous night lingered like the smell of stale smoke. He hadn't yet revealed what he'd discovered in the hidden upper room, the sack, the jumbled handwriting, the creaky footstep behind him. But the possibilities pressed in like a storm. Someone in this residence was causing more than mischief. They were engineering quiet. Clara sat alone in the breakfast area, her dish untouched and her cup of tea cold in her hands. As Poirot entered, she gave a wan smile. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Nor I, mademoiselle," he he said, taking a seat next to her. "The air is thick, with something unfinished." She looked down at her tea. Poirot paused, then spoke softly. "You left a letter in the satchel." Clara remained still. She slowly raised her eyes to meet his. "I did not mean to. It was not intended for anyone to read." "Then for whom was it meant?" She opened her mouth to respond, but her lips quiver, so she glanced away. Poirot waited. She finally muttered, "For me. I wrote it after Felix kissed me in the garden last spring. Nothing came from it. He made light of it the next morning. They said it was booze and folly. However, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I jotted down everything I wanted to say but never presented it to him. I left it in the library folded inside a book, and someone found it. I suppose so." Poirot was quiet for a bit. "The sack included more than just your letter. Other materials included Felix's notes, poems, and annotations written in at least 2 different hands. Someone is creating a tale, mademoiselle, a narrative in the shadows." Clara scrunched her brow. "But why?" "That," Poirot remarked gently, "is the question." The door opened, and Julian arrived, already dressed for the day, his tie knotted neatly and his hair brushed with military perfection. He nodded to each of them. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he added, but his tone indicated he didn't care. Poirot stood. "Monsieur Willoughby, please allow me a moment of your attention." Julian arched his brow. "Another interview?" "No," Poirot answered. "This is a conversation. Walk with me." Julian hesitated and then nodded once. They exited via the terrace doors and strolled into the moist garden, their footsteps muffled by the gravel path. The bushes loomed, heavy with mist. "I found something last night," Poirot stated without hesitation. "A satchel is hidden in a room, above the east wing. There is a passage leading there, a servant's stair." Julian cast a sidelong glance. "So, someone's playing games in the walls now? You knew of the passage." "This is an old house. I have examined every inch of it. I used to hide up there when father was enraged." Poirot nodded. "And yet the satchel was not yours?" "No." "Then tell me, what were you doing in the east wing the night the mirror was broken?" Julian ceased walking. His face was expressionless, but his fingers flexed briefly at his side. "I stood in front of it." "That much is true." "Why?" Julian's voice sounded low. "Because my father detested that mirror. He claimed it was cursed. They said it indicated weakness. Every time he passed it, he sneered at it, at himself." "And look at me." Poirot waited. "I was thinking about selling it. Before someone broke it for me." "You didn't break it yourself?" "No." His voice was sharper now, "but I understand why someone would." Poirot turned towards him. "You constantly talk of transformation, monsieur, of rebirth, but you dwell in a home of symbols. Symbols resist being silently dismissed." Julian's eyes narrowed. "This home is a cage, Poirot. The sooner it is torn down, the better. For you, for all of us." He turned and walked back down the corridor, not waiting for a response. Poirot stayed where he was, the mist gathering around his immaculate shoes. The cage. Yes, it was the term. Not only for Julian, for every one of them. Each one was engrossed. In their part, their expectations, and their silence. By late morning, Lady Imogen had requested Poirot's attendance in her study. He discovered her sitting by the hearth, a stack of old letters beside her, and a soft silk scarf wrapped across her lap. "I found this in my drawer this morning," she added, displaying a folded note. Poirot accepted it and read, "One more relic. One more chain has been broken. If you do not pick, the home will make the decision for you." He looked up. "It is escalating." She nodded. "It is becoming more personal. The scarf was mine when I was a girl. My mother embroidered it. I haven't worn it for years." Poirot handled it tenderly. "Say it's the same fabric I discovered wrapped around the broken hairbrush. Someone is using the past to undo the present." She looked down. "I fear I allowed it. By being hesitant. By not acting. On the contrary, madame, you have been preserved. That is not the same as silence." He paused before asking, Who do you believe is behind this? Lady Imogen hesitated before saying, I don't know. I thought I did. I had suspicions about Julian. Then Cassandra. But now I'm wondering. About whom? She gazed at him with eyes that were suddenly aged. Clara. Poirot said nothing. She has been withdrawing. She walks the hallways at night. She keeps to herself more and more. I once saw her in the East Wing, staring at the patched wall with tears in her eyes. Did she explain? She stated that it reminded her of something that had broken and could not be repaired. Poirot sat back. And what do you believe she meant? I do not know. I fear I never really know her. Poirot returned to his chamber in brooding stillness. The pattern was beginning to solidify. Clara's letter, Felix's, scribbles, the shattered heirlooms, the stolen scarf, all scattered symbols that were carefully picked. Someone was crafting a story, not just performing deeds. They were creating a story with the precision of a playwright, feeding each individual just enough mistrust to separate them from the rest. The intention was not crazy. It was manipulation. And then, right before dinner, something happened. A scream. Poirot was in the corridor when it arrived, sharp, high, and female. He dashed toward the sound, across the East Wing corridor, down the stairs and into the drawing room, where Clara stood, hands quivering and face white. A broken photograph frame lay on the carpet at her feet, its glass shattered and the black and white image ripped in two. It was a portrait of Lady Imogen and her late husband. On the back someone wrote in ink, "Even memory is not sacred." Poirot approached Clara, who was whispering, "It wasn't me. This is how I found it." "I swear." "I believe you," Poirot replied kindly. He took up the frame and examined the handwriting, angular, deliberate, and slow. The photograph had not just fallen. It had been placed, torn, displayed. He turned to Clara. "Was anyone else here?" She shakes her head. "I came to find a book, that is all. Then I saw this." Julian arrived first, followed by Cassandra and Felix. "What now?" Julian demanded. Poirot held out the photo to show them the ripped pieces. Felix's eyes widened. That's going too far." "Indeed," Poirot muttered. "This is no longer about disassembling heirlooms. This is a campaign against identity itself." He glanced at them all with piercing eyes. "And the story is nearly finished. But I wonder, how does it end?" The drawing room remained frozen in the aftermath of the scream. The portrait lay on the floor like a wound, its broken pieces resting apart on the rug, the glass glinting slightly beneath the chandelier's dim light. Clara hesitated near the fireplace, her shaky fingers grabbing the back of a chair. Cassandra, lips wide in surprise, took a hesitant step closer, peering at the marred image. Felix, unusually quiet, knelt to study the shards. Julian remained, at the doorway, arms folded and jaw tight. His gaze shifted away from the damaged frame and toward Clara. Poirot alone moved with purpose. He retrieved both half of the shredded photos with a handkerchief and gently placed them on a neighboring table. The ink on the back was still moist in places. Angular letters with no smearing. The message had only been written a few minutes. "Kyotsumai," he turned to face the room. "No one entered before Clara?" No response. The hush lasted too long. Cassandra spoke first, but gently, as if to test her own voice. "I just came through the front corridor. I did not see anyone." "I came from the kitchen," Felix said, his tone softer than usual. "I passed Treadwell on the stairs, but no one else." Julian said nothing. Poirot turned his head towards him. "And you, monsieur?" Julian's expression was unreadable. "I was in my study. I'm preparing letters for tomorrow. Did anyone pass your door?" "No." "If they had, I would have heard." Poirot turned to face Clara. "Mademoiselle, you say you came in to fetch a book?" She nodded, her voice nearly inaudible. "From the cabinet by the window. I did not notice the frame until I turned around. Then I saw the glass." Poirot moved slowly to the window. The draperies were only partially open. A gentle breeze moved the translucent inner curtains. He peered at the window frame. Then "Still, there's a smear, dust disturbed. A tiny thread of fabric snagged on a clasp. Someone had been passed here. Someone who is familiar with the house and knows how to enter without being seen. He turned back. The vandal didn't enter through the door. They entered through the window. Julian frowned. But it opens onto the west patio. Anyone could have witnessed. Only if they were looking, Poirot said. The fog has lifted somewhat, but it still clings to the hedges. A figure may traverse the lawn unobserved, and if they waited till the home was quiet... Cassandra exhaled sharply. This is becoming grotesque. No, Poirot said, his voice calm but forceful. This is getting final. This deed was not just symbolic, it was surgical. The mirror shattered the house's reflection. The heirloom brush broke convention. Madame, the message beneath your door destroyed the authority of recollection. But this photo... He stared at Lady Imogen, who had just arrived after being summoned silently by instinct or echo. This was the last bit of family dignity. The image of marriage, of permanency. Whoever tore this intends more than just to disrupt. They want to erase. Lady Imogen examined both half of the photograph. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Poirot approached her. Madame, it must end tonight, before the final blow is struck. She nodded, her voice scratchy. What do you need? Poirot turned to face the others. Everyone is to stay in the house tonight. Every door will be locked. I'll chat briefly with each of you again before supper. Nobody is to go upstairs alone. And when the time comes, I'll assemble you for one last talk. Felix gave a hollow laughter. The drawing room. Once more? Should we dress for the occasion? Julian cut in sharply. This isn't theatre. But it is, Poirot replied, his tone abruptly stern. It's been theatre since the beginning, a collection of scenes and activities intended to manipulate, to accuse, to shame. He let the words hang, then added more softly, but in all such plays there comes the moment when the curtain is drawn and the players face their audience. That night supper was nearly silent. Treadwell went between them like a man delivering funeral preparations instead of food. Poirot ate carefully, noting each gesture. The way Julian tapped his fork against his glass as if counting time, the way Cassandra drank from her water goblet with both hands, as if wanting the stability. Clara's eyes remained fixated on her dish. Felix pushed food around without tasting it. At 9 o'clock, Poirot requested that everyone return to the drawing room. No one complained. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Shadows danced across the carved edges of the paneling. Poirot stood at the hearth again, surrounded by firelight. He waited until everyone was seated before gently pulling a folded paper from his pocket, containing the photograph's broken halves. This, he added softly, was not an act of impulse. It was premeditated, and the message on the back was intended for more than just Lady Imogen. It was for all of you. It says that even memory is not holy, and I feel that is the key. Julian scoffed. To what? To understand the motivation, not for theft or violence, but for erasure. Someone in this mansion does not just want to influence the future. They aim to alter the past. He gazed at Clara. You mentioned walking the East Wing and feeling like you were trespassing, because someone has made you feel like a visitor in your own home. Then to Felix. You wrote things in private, poems, thoughts, reflections, and someone used them to expose you, not to hurt you personally, but to rupture trust. Then to Cassandra. You have preserved elegance here, yes, but your silence toward Clara, your resistance to change, someone has used your distance as ammunition. Finally, let us turn to Julian. You have wished to tear this place down from the start, but what if someone wants to beat you to it, to ensure that when Ashcroft falls, it is on your head rather than theirs? Julian stared at him. What exactly are you implying? I only mean that everything has led up to tonight, and that the final act is approaching. A startling knock relieved the stress. Treadwell entered solemnly. Excuse me, sir, but I found something outside, in the hedgerow near the eastern garden. He held out a tiny packet. Poirot took it. A fountain pen was wrapped in linen, with its nib still wet with dark ink. Wrapped around it was a ripped piece of familiar paper, Felix's letterhead. Poirot unwrapped it completely. The final sentence was written in precise, controlled handwriting. The past is poison. Let it die. Julian stood. That's Felix's paper. Felix stepped back. I didn't write that. Poirot raised the scrap towards the light. No, monsieur, you didn't. He turned it towards Clara. This is your hand. The room was very still. Clara blinked. Her lips parted and then closed. She talked in a voice unlike any she had used before, calmer, deeper, and without trembling. Yes, she answered. I wrote it. The room erupted. Julian said something incomprehensible. Cassandra gave a gasp. Felix stood silently. Poirot lifted his hand. Silence, please. Let her speak. Clara did not look at any of them. She merely glanced at the fire. I did not wish to injure anyone, not truly, but I wanted her to see, to experience what it is like to lose everything piece by piece. Like I did. Lady Imogen's voice cracked. Clara, what have you lost? My mother, she whispered. Your sister. You buried her in this house, but you never talked about her again. You erased her, and me. I was simply a quiet niece. The orphan. The person who should be grateful. Poirot took a gentle step closer. So you became the ghost. Clara nodded. I never wanted Ashcroft, but I wanted her to look at me, come see me. Not just the girl in the corner. Felix moved towards her. You wrote the notes. What about the mirror? Didn't break the mirror, she explained. That wasn't me, but I wrote the notes, planted the scarf, I took the satchel, and I wrote the last one tonight. I figured maybe she'd see. Lady Imogen's eyes shimmered. Clara, I see you now. Clara turned aside. Too late. Poirot placed his hand on her arm. Non, mademoiselle, not too late. However, the play has ended, and the curtain must now fall. A fire crackled behind them, and Ashcroft Hall, ancient and tired, finally exhaled. The hush that followed Clara's confession was unlike any that had permeated Ashcroft Hall in recent days. This one was still, but not fragile. It was something deeper, like the earth paused before a storm, or a long-held sigh finally breathed. Lady Imogen remained sat, her back straight, but her eyes no longer possessed the steely resolve that had marked her from the start. Instead, they shimmered with familiarity rather than alarm. It was as if, for the first time in years, she saw the girl in front of her as someone with depth, intent, and pain, rather than an orphaned remnant of a forgotten generation. Poirot stood with his hands lightly folded, observing but not meddling or pressuring. The unwinding was completed. His task was practically finished. Cassandra rose from her chair with a breathy "excuse me" and gently exited the room, as if the weight of someone else's vulnerability had become too much to carry. Julian's brow furrowed, but there was something more behind it, perplexity mixed with a growing understanding, a realization that the instability he'd blamed on external forces could have stemmed from wounds within the house he'd worked so hard to deconstruct. Felix, ever the aloof observer, now gazed at Clara with a new expression. Gone was the amused tilt of the mouth or the half-curious eyes. He had a sense of heaviness about him, a form of respect. Lady Imogen stood slowly, the firelight reflecting off the silver in her hair. You wrote the notes, she said, her voice more stable than any of them expected. But you did not break the mirror. Clara shakes her head. No, I wanted to scare you. Or rather, not you exactly. I wanted to shake this place, to break its symmetry, but I couldn't bring myself to crush something so old and wonderful. Poirot finally went forward. Then, mademoiselle, who did? Clara fixed her gaze on him, then carefully moved across the room to Felix. He blinked once, then gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I did, he answered. I broke the mirror. Julian let out a hard breath. You what? Felix shrugged and spoke softly. I couldn't stand the way it looked at us, at me, all this history, all that judgment. So, I destroyed it. I am sorry, Lady Imogen. She did not answer immediately. Then she simply stated, I suspected, but I convinced myself I was dreaming things. Poirot gestured slightly. So, we now understand the beginning. The mirror was the overture, born of impulse. But Clara, Mademoiselle, you went a step further. You created the rest, she nodded. I had been planning it. Not in a villainous way, at least not initially. It began with letters I discovered, my mother's journals and notes written before her death. She adored the mansion, but it also broke her. The silence. What a shame. The way the family hid pain behind politeness. I began to understand how everything worked. The artifacts, rituals and roles that we all play. So you decided to break the roles, Poirot spoke, one by one. Yes. I figured if I disrupted everything just enough, someone would speak. Lady Imogen would have to see what she had been ignoring, that someone would eventually ask me how I felt. For once, Lady Imogen closed her eyes for a long moment before crossing the room to sit beside Clara. She didn't touch her, but her voice, when it came, was softer than any of them had heard. I should have asked. Years ago, when you were a child, when you lost your mother, I assumed kindness would be enough. I see now, it wasn't. Clara looked down at her hands. I wasn't brave enough to confront anyone directly, she murmured, so I left little ghosts for you all to chase. Poirot said gently, and yet in leaving ghosts you revealed truths. That is the irony of deception, mademoiselle. Often it is only through illusion that we discover what is real. Felix sat forward. So, what now? What happens to her? Julian stood. There has to be some consequence. She manipulated everyone in this house. No, said Lady Imogen, her voice suddenly firm. There does not have to be punishment, Julian. There has to be understanding. This was not a crime of greed or malice. It was a cry from someone we all overlooked. Julian didn't respond, but his mouth tightened, his eyes lowering. Not in anger, perhaps in something closer to shame. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Monsieur, Felix, you broke the mirror. Mademoiselle Clara, you left the notes and staged the symbolic messages. Neither of you intended violence, but had this continued, it might not have ended in theatre. It might have escalated. Clara nodded. I know. Then allow me to suggest, Poirot said, that we end the performance now, with honesty. The fire crackled in the hearth again, louder than before. Clara leaned forward, voice quiet but certain. I don't want the house, she said. I don't want the inheritance or the legacy. I only want to be free of pretending, and to be remembered as something more than an afterthought. Lady Imogen looked into the flames for a long moment. Then she stood and turned to the others. We'll revise my will, she said. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because it is time this house stopped being a monument to duty. It should reflect love and reality. Clara will be given the cottage on the south end of the estate, the one her mother loved. It will be hers completely. If she chooses to stay, she stays. If she chooses to leave, she leaves with my blessing. Clara blinked, stunned. Julian looked up. You're dismantling the estate? I'm dismantling the illusion, Julian. The house may stand, but it will no longer be ruled by silence. Poirot offered a small nod. A wise decision, madam. Cassandra re-entered then, quietly, as though she had been listening from the hallway. She approached Lady Imogen and Clara without speaking and placed a small envelope on the mantel. I believe this belongs to you, she said to Clara. Clara picked it up. It was the letter she'd written and thought lost. Cassandra added, almost to herself, I found it tucked into a book in the library days ago. I meant to return it. But I wasn't sure when. Clara smiled faintly. Thank you. Poirot stepped back toward the door. His presence, once central, was now receding. I believe, mes amis, he said with a small bow, my work here is done. The ghosts have spoken, and the future, at last, may begin. Lady Imogen stood beside him at the threshold. You have not only solved our mystery, Monsieur Poirot, you've altered the way we perceive each other. He tilted his head. No, madame, I simply held up a mirror. One is not yet broken. And with that, Hercule Poirot gathered his hat, gloves, and small suitcase and strolled out into the mist which was slowly beginning to lift. Poirot's footsteps echoed gently along the gravel as he left Ashcroft Hall, his silhouette briefly obscured by the thinning mist curling low across the lawn. Behind him, the mansion stood motionless, gloomy as usual but somehow lighter, like a theatre after the last curtain had dropped, its echoes lingering in the rafters. The wind gently tugged on the hem of his garment. He hesitated at the edge of the drive, turning to gaze back at the manor. The windows glowed softly with firelight. Truths had been revealed and shadows had been identified. Yet something lingered, that ache at the base of the mind, a tiny discord like a missing bar in an otherwise flawless tune. Poirot didn't dismiss it. The tiny grey cells never did. That night, he stayed at a tiny inn in the nearby village of Crescombe, where the rooms were small but clean and the kitchen made a decent onion tart. He sat by the fireplace in the common area long after the other guests had gone to bed, his hands neatly folded on the arms of the chair, his eyes half closed in thought. Clara's goals were apparent, although emotionally complex, and Felix's act of vandalism, while impetuous, served simply as the introduction to her well-choreographed series of symbolic interruptions. Lady Imogen's choice had been just, and perhaps even generous. Everything should have been resolved. However, Poirot was well aware that resolution and truth were not always synonymous. He awoke early, dressed with care, and had just finished his coffee when the village postmistress entered, her cheeks flushed. "From the wind. Monsieur Poirot?" she exclaimed anxiously. "You're the gentleman from Ashcroft, aren't you?" "I am, madame," he said, standing graciously. "Is something the matter?" "I have something unusual. We found it in the sorting room this morning. The postmaster stated it was misfiled and must have slipped behind a shelf, but the name drew my attention." She gave him a little envelope that was slightly smudged but otherwise intact. The handwriting was strange. Poirot turned it over. It was not addressed to Lady Imogen, Julian, or anyone in the family. It was addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, C.O. Ashcroft Hall. He frowned. He murmured, "Merci," and she left him to it. He opened the envelope with the flat of his fingernail and took out a single page of heavy notepaper. There were a few short lines, written carefully, yet weirdly formal. "You were correct. It was never about inheritance. It was all about control. I did not expect her to go that far, but now I see I told her the narrative, didn't I?" No name, no signature, but Poirot understood the tone. The phrase, the voice, Felix. He folded the letter gingerly, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it into his inside pocket. The feeling had not deceived him. The performance was concluded. But not all of the words had been spoken. He returned to Ashcroft on foot, the distance short, his stride providing shape to his thoughts. When he arrived, the grounds were peaceful, and he was let in without resistance by the housekeeper, Mrs. Bletchley, who appeared unsurprised to see him. "They've mostly kept to themselves today," she explained as she led him down the front corridor. "Lady Imogen is in the conservatory. Clara has been in the gardens. Mr. Julian departed early, London, I believe. Miss Cassandra is in her bedroom. Mr. Felix, he's in the library." Poirot thanked her and went directly to the library. He discovered Felix by the far window, stretched in one of the deep leather chairs with a book open but unread on his lap. He looked up as Poirot entered and gave a tired smile. "I wondered when you'd come back." Poirot took a seat across from him and crossed one leg neatly. "A letter. You expected it to reach me?" "I was unsure. I wondered if the mail gods could just delay it sufficiently." "It arrived precisely when it needed to," Poirot added. "Now, tell me." "What did you mean?" Felix exhaled. "She used me. Clara. Not purposefully, I think. Not at first. But when I showed her my writings and poetry and told her how suffocating this place was, how everything was tied together by dead names and dusty customs, I noticed a transformation in her." He gazed outside the window. "It was not malicious, she was too delicate for that, but she was clever. She knows how to make suggestions. I said the mirror was ugly and cursed. Then it shatters. I told her I'd always wanted to slip behind the walls of this building, behind the portraits, as if the home had its own secret. A week later, my satchel vanishes, and my poems reappear in new contexts and voices." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you said nothing. Felix laughed softly. Because it was gorgeous, in a bizarre, twisted manner. She had taken my words, my anger, my metaphors, and made them alive. And as everything started to break apart, when the family began to splinter, I understood I wasn't just a spectator. I was her co-author. Poirot tilted his head. So you wrote nothing yourself? No, only a mirror. That was my crime. I'm angry. The rest was her stage. Poirot paused, then quietly stated, "There is something you are still not telling me." Felix gazed at him. "You knew about the servant's stare?" Felix smiled without mirth. "Everyone does. Julian claims it's an ancient secret, but we discovered it as children. I used it frequently. Once I left notes for Cassandra through it, long before. She married Julian." Poirot leant forward slightly. "You told Clara about it?" Felix's smile wavered. "Yes." Poirot's voice was quiet. "And then she used it. To place the broken brush, the notes, the letters." Felix nodded. "She was adept at sliding past people, at not being noticed." Poirot stood slowly. "You handed her the tools. She gave them meaning." Felix did not rise as he watched him leave. "What does that make me, Poirot?" Poirot stopped at the door. "A muse," he remarked. "Or perhaps a ghost of your own making." He exited the library in silence. The conservatory was bathed in afternoon light, and Lady Imogen stood among the potted roses, clipping dead blossoms with delicate scissors. She turned as Poirot approached. "You came back." "I had to." Her eyes met his and her demeanor changed. "It's not over, is it?" "It is," Poirot replied kindly. "However, it never ends fully. Clara's actions, along with Felix's, were not criminal, but it was a reflection." "Of what?" "Of the silences you assumed were safe, the ghosts you buried beneath your own strength." Lady Imogen lowered her scissors. She asked if I loved her. I said I did, but I realized I hadn't said it before. "Not in all these years," Poirot nodded. "Then say it now. Say it again, until she believes it." He took her hand gently and turned to leave. This time he left without looking back at Ashcroft. The air became clearer, and the fog lifted. The shadows, though long, no longer whispered as loudly. That evening, Poirot dined alone at the modest inn in Crescombe. But this time the fire was warmer, and the room was quieter in a more settled way. He had finished his fish and was sipping his coffee when the innkeeper, a cheerful man with an affinity for over-polished brass, appeared at the door with a sheepish grin. "There's a young lady asking for you, sir. She wouldn't give her name, but she said it was important." Poirot put his cup down without surprise. "Please, show her in." The girl who entered the room did not match his expectations. Not Clara, though, for a moment, her pale coat and soft features gave that illusion. But as she stepped forward, the flickering firelight revealed a different cast to the face. Narrower, more angular, with tightly drawn lips and a tension coiled in her shoulders. She was younger than 30, and her clothes, though discreet, carried a faint suggestion of London. Her gloves were too fine for a village girl. Poirot rose and bowed slightly. "Bonsoir, mademoiselle. You seek Hercule Poirot?" "I do," she said. Her voice was low, calm. "My name is Vera Harper. I used to work at Ashcroft Hall." He gestured for her to sit. "Indeed. And what was your role, if I may ask?" "Parlour maid. 2 years ago. I left suddenly. Perhaps they told you." "They mentioned Honora. That was the name I gave the household," she told me. "It wasn't mine." Poirot paid special attention to her. "And why come now, mademoiselle?" Vera hesitated, staring at the fire as if unsure where to begin. "I read about your visit in the village post," she finally remarked. "That something had transpired in Ashcroft, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it emerged." Poirot stayed silent, giving her room. "I left because of Julian Willoughby," she explained, her voice faint but steady. "He never touched me, not directly. But he made the house hazardous, particularly at night. He drank more than anyone realized, had a temper. One night, he followed me down a corridor near the east wing. I locked myself in a linen closet until the morning." Poirot's expression remained unchanged, but his stance varied somewhat. "You told no one?" "I tried telling Mrs. Bletchley, but she claimed I must have misunderstood, that the family was under stress, and it would be unwise to cause problems. So I departed the following day." Poirot leaned forwards. "And since then, I kept an eye on everything. I overheard rumors after the Colonel died. I heard Julian had taken over. I returned to Crescombe last week to see a friend, and I learned that Lady Imogen had hired a detective about the heirlooms and threats." "And you thought it might be Julian?" She nodded. "He constantly described the house as if it were a burden, as if everyone was in his way. I just figured if something worse happened and I said nothing, I'd carry it." Poirot stood slowly. "Mademoiselle, your comments may have little effect on what has already happened. However, they may avoid future injury." He asked her a few more quiet questions, noted her address, and politely thanked her. When she went, he stood by the window for a long time, watching her disappear into the darkness. The following morning, Poirot returned to Ashcroft Hall. He didn't announce his coming this time. He was expected. He discovered Lady Imogen alone in the morning parlour, clad in dove grey and holding a chilled cup of tea. "You've heard something," she replied simply. He nodded. "A former employee approached me, one who left abruptly. She talked about your son." Lady Imogen closed her eyes. "I suspected," she muttered. "But suspicion without proof is a coward's burden. She did not come to accuse you, madame, only to warn. She believes the environment in this house facilitated more than just silence. It facilitated fear." Imogen peered out the window. "Julian is in London. He wrote this morning, said he expects to make a formal offer to sell the estate to a developer. Apartments," he explained. "Modern and practical." Poirot's jaws constricted. "Even now?" She nodded. "Even now." "Then forgive my bluntness, madame, but I must ask, why do you allow it?" She laid her cup down with a clink. "Because it is easier to fight ghosts than your own children." Poirot studied her. "And yet, you've begun. With Clara. With your will." Lady Imogen took a quick breath, half sigh, half grief. "Yes, but I'm wondering if it's too late to reverse the rest." Poirot shakes his head. "It is never too late to get exact. A mistake might last years, but the truth only takes a second." He left her thinking and went upstairs. He discovered Felix packing a shabby bag in his room, with an old tweed coat neatly folded on top. "You are leaving, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Felix nodded without turning. "I think it is time. Clara benefits from having more space. Cassandra has said very little, which I believe is her way of forgiving me. And Julian, well, I doubt he will miss me." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "And you? Do you regret it?" Felix paused and then looked up. "Yes. And no. I regret the silence more than the sound." Poirot nodded. An eloquent summary. Poirot discovered Clara in the far yard, among the autumn flowers. She appeared thinner but clearer, as if her pain had taken shape and been made bearable. "I thought, are you gone?" she remarked sweetly. "I had, but there was one final truth to address." She gently turned toward him. "Clara," he added softly, "you thought the only way to be noticed was to disrupt, but you were noticed even in your silence. By Lady Imogen, sure. However, someone else did it as well." He held out a letter. Clara took it with a perplexed expression and unfolded it. It was written in Felix's hand. "I have not forgiven you yet, but I understand you. And when one realizes, forgiving is possible. Clara, you utilized my words. Nevertheless, I also used you. Making you feel seen helped me feel less invisible. I'm leaving Ashcroft, but I'm leaving behind the only thing that matters. Someone who truly loved it." Her eyes progressively filled with tears. "He wrote this," Poirot nodded. "Last night, before—" He packed. She closed the letter and pressed it against her chest. "Will I ever be forgiven, do you think?" "That is not for me to say, mademoiselle. But you've given this place something no inheritance could, a mirror that reflects it as it truly is." She smiled slightly. "Unbroken." Poirot tilted his hat. He left Ashcroft Hall for the last time as Crescombe Chapel's bells began to chime at lunchtime. The sun had broken through the clouds, throwing long beams across the frost-covered fields. He didn't look back as he travelled the twisting route away from the estate, not out of haste, but out of trust. The ghosts have names. The secrets were revealed. And for once the past did not pursue him. It remained exactly where it belonged. Behind. The train moved smoothly through the Dorset countryside, its rhythm steady and almost hypnotic. Hercule Poirot sat in a first-class carriage, his hands folded neatly over his lap, and his valise tucked precisely beneath his seat. He had removed his gloves, but not his overcoat. Across from him, the distant hills passed peacefully, their silhouettes softened by the pale autumn light. He had thought the case was closed. He had assumed that Clara's confession, Felix's cooperation, and Lady Imogen's gentle grace in response had handled the issue. However, Poirot understood that resolution did not necessarily equate to justice. It was not always true. He took a final note from his breast pocket, which had been delivered that morning at the inn shortly before his departure. There was no return address, but he quickly recognized the handwriting as Cassandra's. The note was brief. Poirot, Julian has withdrawn his offer. He never reached London. Something transformed him. I believe it was the silence that followed your visit, during which no one accused him, but everyone knew. He has gone to stay with a cousin in the north. For reflection, he said. We will see. Remain Poirot carefully folded the note and returned it to his pocket. Cassandra had always been a cipher, neither cruel nor kind, merely concerned with survival. But there was more to her quiet now. Perhaps a sliver of clarity. As the landscape blurred past the windows, Poirot closed his eyes and studied the case, not simply as a succession of events, but as a study in stillness. Ashcroft Hall had not been destroyed by violence or avarice. It had been undone by what had not been said, silenced anguish, excused injustices, and positions accepted without resistance. Clara had attempted to break the stillness with theatrical tactics, but in the process, she did something considerably more delicate. She pushed every member of that home to hear themselves for the first time. Poirot gave himself a slight smile. He remembered Lady Imogen standing amid the roses with the shears, idle in her hands. Clara held Felix's letter close to her heart. Felix was restless and apprehensive, but he eventually moved. Julian may be fleeing in quiet shame rather than arrogance. The threads had not been completely repaired, but they had been freed, untangled, and let free. And Poirot felt that was enough. The train entered the next station with a hiss of steam and clatter of brakes. Poirot grabbed his coat and stood, carefully positioning his hat atop his head. He walked down onto the platform just as the wind blew, scattering the leaves in little exquisite spirals around his shined shoes. Behind him, the train moaned and disappeared, its sound fading into the distance. The road awaited him, quiet, civilized and ordered, just how he liked it. Hercule Poirot strolled on, his little grey cells satisfied once more,